Great. Well, welcome everybody to reach a wider audience by creating accessible social media posts. As Jenna mentioned, my name is Michaela Liederman. I'm the Senior Accessibility and QA Lead here at Atten. I am a certified web accessibility specialist through the International Association of Accessibility Professionals. And let's jump in and let's talk a little bit about accessible social media posts. With today's agenda, we're going to do a quick introduction to digital accessibility as a whole. Some of that might be a little new to you. Some of you may already be a little bit aware of what digital accessibility is, but I do think it's important to do something brief so that we're all on the same page. We want to talk about why we should be making our social media posts accessible. We'll talk about what platform is the most accessible and how we can all be making our posts more accessible to everybody. So first, we will go over some very basic overview of digital accessibility. As mentioned before, some of you may already be a little familiar with the topic, but I'm sure there are some people here who still are new to this topic. So I think it's important to go over briefly. So first, questions first. What is digital accessibility? Well, it means that websites, tools, and technologies are designed and developed so that people with disabilities can use them. This is really great in theory, but how do we actually follow and implement this in practice? We actually follow the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, WCAG. You'll probably hear me call it WCAG or WCAG. These are the international guidelines for accessibility standards for the internet, including digital desktops, laptops, tablets, and mobile devices. I'm not going to go into too much detail today about it, but as long as we are all on the same page and know that these are the standards we are basing all of this information off of today, then we should be good to go. And next, we really want to talk a little bit about who needs an accessible website. I know when I first started thinking about accessible websites, my mind immediately went to someone who needs to use a screen reader, and that's even with a family member with a physical disability. So let's ask this again. Who actually needs an accessible website? And well, everyone actually benefits from an accessible website. There may be some demographics that we work extra hard to accommodate for, but in reality, creating a more accessible website creates a better user experience for you and for me. I love this infographic from the Swedish Public Employment Service. They did a great job of showing the various forms of levels of why we need accessible websites and how it can benefit each one of us at any point. So if we're taking a look at this infographic, you can see we touch upon all the various forms of impairments there may be related to touch or physical disabilities, seeing and visual, hearing, speaking, and cognitive. But then we also have these levels of how these impairments could impact each one of us. So we have those permanent impairments where, like, maybe you only have one arm, maybe you have Duchenne muscular dystrophy, maybe you're completely blind or colorblind, or even just deaf. You could be in a situation where maybe this is almost relevant to you as well. So think about maybe carrying a baby or a computer. So now you only have one arm to actually interact with that phone. Or maybe you're outside in the sun and now the contrast on your screen really isn't very great. Another great one that we see all the time is maybe you're on a loud bus or noisy surroundings, so that maybe captions are necessary so that you can watch those videos that you want to watch. And then temporary is just talking about something that obviously you can't just leave that situation to make it a little bit better. You obviously have something maybe going on. So you have an arm injury, a broken arm, or an ear infection, so you can't really hear quite as well. But it shows that every single one of us could be impaired in some way, whether it is situational or permanent disability. Now, I'm not saying that situational impairments are the exact same or the same level of severeness as a permanent, but obviously just showing that this can impact any one of us at any time. So it is very important that we make everything accessible to everyone, because it just makes a better experience for everyone involved. So why should we be making our social media posts accessible? Well, 246 million user accounts are currently open with various social media platforms as of January 2023 in the United States. And again, these are user accounts. One person could have multiple accounts open, but still, that's a lot of user accounts that are open, and 246 million, that's pretty good. And there are 61 million adults in the US that live with some form of a disability. That's roughly 27% of the adult population. or about 1 in 4 adults. And again, you can see I keep emphasizing adults because this statistic is only for 18 and older. We don't have any of those smartphone, social media obsessed statistics in here, of course, because those people, they're not 18 or older. They could be 16. Your demographic could be targeting those younger children, and they're not even included in this disability count. So it's something you want to think about, that 1 in 4 adults is kind of a lot. So we want to make sure that this could be someone interacting with your content, 1 in 4 users. So we just want to focus in and make sure all of those people are using it as well. Not only are there just a lot of people you could be excluding with your social content, but in general, social media is just the easiest way to get your organization's name out to the masses. It gives you the ability to connect with your audience and for your audience to connect with you, something a lot of websites just definitely cannot do. And again, millions of people are using social media in the United States alone. Even reaching out to 1% of that is extremely helpful for your organization. And of course, it's free or practically free in most cases, unless you're doing some kind of like add-on service or specialty service, maybe a scheduling service. So what better way to get your message out there without even spending a penny? And most importantly, making your post accessible sends a positive message about your values as an organization. And honestly, this can go a long way. And just like accessible websites, in the end, it actually helps everyone interacting with your organization, not just those who rely on assistive technology. So now that you know a little bit about why you should be focusing on the social aspect, the most important question really is, what social media platform is the most accessible? Before we jump into that, though, I would love to know about the platform that you are all seeing the most engagement or traffic from. Jenna's going to pull up a poll here. So if you don't mind just choosing one of the options there, just so we have an idea of what people are getting the most engagement and traffic from overall. We have Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, LinkedIn. And if you do have a different option that's not listed there, feel free to put it into the chat. And then we'll just give you a couple moments to fill that out. Let's see, what do the results say? So it looks like most people are actually getting their traffic and engagement from Instagram, and then next is Twitter, then Facebook, and then LinkedIn. No one's really getting anything on TikTok. Next, we can dive in. What do we actually think the most accessible platform is? Jenna has another one. I'm curious to see what everyone thinks is the most accessible now that we're seeing what people are actually getting engagement on. So Jenna, if you mind pulling up that poll. So what social media platform is the most accessible? Do you think it's Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, or LinkedIn? So we'll take a moment and see what everybody is thinking regarding the most accessible platform. Let's see. And the results are in. People think that Facebook and Twitter are tied as the most accessible. And then we have Instagram and LinkedIn tied next, and TikTok has the lowest votes. Okay, that's pretty interesting. Well, this may come as a surprise to many of you, but the most accessible platform is actually none of them. Each one of them have their pros and their cons as a platform, but I would never recommend one of them as the most accessible. But also, even if it was the most accessible, it doesn't mean that one platform is the most popular. So then it wouldn't reach the largest audience, or maybe it wouldn't reach your target audience. So this brings up my next big question to explore. Why are all the platforms so bad when it comes to accessibility? And well, mostly because most platforms are just visually based. So think images and videos. But that doesn't mean that people who are visually impaired don't also like to scroll through what's trending. This is mostly an issue because it gives the false appearance that users who may be blind aren't on social media. So then we don't have to accommodate for them. But really, that isn't true at all. Everyone loves filling their day with useless scrolling and funny videos and memes. Another issue is just overall perception and lack of knowledge about digital accessibility. Most people hear accessibility and just immediately think blind, when in reality, 1 in 12 men are colorblind, which you may not recognize as needing accessible accommodations. Captions not only help the hearing impaired, but is great for anyone who may be temporarily impacted, like on a loud bus, like we talked about before. Many people have cognitive disorders that you wouldn't even think about, such as dyslexia or maybe a seizure disorder. Even ADD and ADHD is considered a cognitive disorder that can impact how they may interact with the platform. Making these accessible to certain groups actually just creates a better experience overall for anyone interacting with the platform. And social media platforms are always updating. These happen without any kind of warning. These could be super small enhancements to large UI changes. And these tend to happen with little to no testing. And any of the testing that does actually go through very rarely has any outside user testers for these updates. I've even read that Facebook pushes up to 5 updates a day. That's 5. That's a lot of updates. Yes, most of them are minor, but that's a lot of updates if no one is actually testing them. And probably the biggest reason, content is all user created. Just like websites, the content on the page tends to be the most inaccessible, not the code. It's hard to teach everyone about color contrast, image descriptions, use of alternative text, video captions, and so on. But that brings up the point that these aren't always just well thought out content like something we may be putting on our website that gets edited, drafted, reviewed before we even publish it. It's a way for many users to feel validated, a source of instant gratification, to feel engaged or entertained, and so on. And this includes people who rely on assistive technology. But if all the content is difficult for users of assistive tech to comprehend, then we are losing an entire audience. And while I know I just talked about how bad that they could be, but they're really not that bad. The various platforms have done what they can to make sure that the site or app is as usable as possible as a whole, excluding their user content. For instance, they are at least giving the opportunity for alternative text for images. And many of them actually use AI to have some kind of fallback if you don't include any alternative text. It's not ideal, but at least there's something there so it's not inaccessible to anybody there. So of course, let's jump into what you all are here for. How can we actually make our posts more accessible? Now we have some overall guidelines to follow in order to make our posts more accessible. First, we want to follow content-related WCAG criteria for captions and post descriptions. So when you are writing your descriptions for your post, remember to never write in all caps. Writing something like this is actually really terrible for a screen reader user because screen readers announce text written in all capital letters like this, letter by letter. So for instance, a screen reader right now would be reading this as NEVERWRITE, etc., etc. If you are using an acronym, then yes, of course, this is what we want to be using. But for emphasized text, this is not okay. Not only is it just an issue for screen reader users, but text written in all caps can be very difficult to read in long strings for all users, but especially those with cognitive impairments and reading disorders. And of course, this is just common knowledge. We should be avoiding misspellings in general, but I do think it's important to touch upon today because misspelled words are difficult for all users, of course, but especially those who rely on screen reader technology. Visual users can try to use context clues to change the misspelling, or I'm sure we've all seen that thing. It's like a meme out there that says like, if you can read this, and it has this whole large paragraph of text and every single word is misspelled, but the first and last letter is always the same. And the rest of the letters are jumbled in there and everyone can still read it. Like it's something a visual user can actually still somewhat comprehend. However, screen readers will actually try to pronounce the word as it is written, as it is misspelled, and it will not try to correct the mistake or read it letter by letter for the user to figure out. So at that point, now this user is listening to a word that they've never heard or doesn't make any sense. So make sure you're avoiding those misspellings. Next, we want to make sure that we follow visual related WCAG criteria for all images. Those who rely first, we want to make sure we don't embed text into images at all. I know that that's kind of crazy to say. This is something easier said than done, something that we see more on websites to not embed text into images. But overall, I know you're going to embed text into images, so we're going to talk about a way to make it at least a little bit more accessible. But the reason why I'm bringing this up is because those who rely on screen reader technology will not have access to the text on that image. And those who are low vision or colorblind may have difficult time reading the text if it is not done to proper contrast guidelines. If the image includes text, we want to be sure to include that same text in the image description or caption. For example, we have this beautiful Instagram here of our Director of Project Management, Janice, and she spoke about the stakeholder management for all size projects on this date at this time. So there's a lot of important information in that image. And what we did is we made sure that same exact information is found in the caption. So no matter if you're a visual person looking at this image here, you can still get the information, or you can be using a screen reader, or maybe you're just an overall, you prefer looking at the actual words in the text because you're using like a screen magnifier. You'll be able to get that same information whether you're taking it from the image or from the caption itself. Next, we want to make sure we pay attention to color contrast. Color contrast is very important if the information in your image is conveying important information like a date or time. So users who are low vision or colorblind can still access that same information. So if you're having white text over an image and it's kind of like maybe it's a bunch of flowers in the background, it may be a little difficult to read. You want to make sure we need to follow that color contrast and there's no distracting patterns behind it. Next, we want to make sure that we do not distinguish by color alone. Color should not be the only way to distinguish important information in an image, such as in charts, graphs, and other infographics. This is because we want to make sure those who are colorblind can easily distinguish the important information. So let's take a look at what I'm talking about here. So for example, we just have this simple circle graph, and you can see we have blue, red, green, purple, and like this tealish color, and there are percentages that are associated with it. But if you wanted to know what the red meant, you actually have to go over to the key and kind of dictate like, okay, red is associated with cats. Now we see what's going on. However, if you're colorblind, it may be very difficult to distinguish the purple, the teal, and that blue from each other. So now you actually don't know if the 40% is related to dogs or hamsters or rabbits. So that could be a very difficult situation to deal with. So by including the text over with the graph itself, maybe it's just 15% hamsters right next to each other. It could be dictated by maybe a pattern or something, so that there's something else besides just color distinguishing it, so that all users can understand what it is. You could also have it in a different format. Maybe you have it like this for visual users, and then in a table for the next one. It doesn't really matter as long as there is another way for a user to get that information that does not rely on color. And next, we want to make sure that all images should include alternative text. All social platforms that allow static images also allow alternative text for these images. For those who don't know what alternative text is, it's just kind of what it's saying. It's alternative text to the image being shown. So all that it is you want to make sure that it's short and succinct at about 10 to 15 words. Try not to go more than that. And it describes the content of the image within the context of why it's being used. It's just describing the image to a user who may not be able to see it in a way that makes sense around the content. So for example, you could have one image used in two different places on your website, for example, and they could have two different alternative texts because they're conveying different information. A good example of this that I like to use is maybe it's a bunch of kids in a football huddle, and it's used on a sign-up page, but it's also used on a like rules of football. So on the sign-up page, it may just say, kids gathered in a circle prior to the game or something like that. And then in the rules of football, it's going to probably go into a little bit more detail about what the football huddle is. So kids in a circle getting instructions on the next play or something like that. So it gives a little bit more detail on what's actually happening there. Now, I know most of you are probably using a scheduling app to do your social posts. Here at Atten, we use HubSpot, and it includes alternative text for all the social platforms. Does anyone want to put in what scheduling app they may be using in the chat? And if so, do you have the ability to add alternative text to that scheduling app? We'll give people a moment, and if no one does, then we'll skip right over it. But I am curious to see what scheduling apps people are using, and if you have the ability to use alternative text. Anybody? No answers in the chat, but that's okay. I am curious about that just because obviously there's so many out there. We don't want to give you any false information about if it's possible or not possible. But if you do have questions about that after, we are more than welcome to answer any questions regarding the scheduling apps and alternative text. We can always look into more detail with you. But Obviously, I'm not going to go show you all the different scheduling apps and how to include alternative text, but I'm going to go through a few of the platforms so that we can see how easy it is to actually include alternative text to our images in the platform itself. So let's take a look at Instagram first. So this will be Instagram on desktop. Very easily, you can see I added a photo, beautiful photo of Mount Evans. It's springtime. And immediately there's an accessibility drop down. So you can click on that and add alternative text. It makes it very easy. There's no extra clicks and it's all front and center. So you know exactly what's going on. On the mobile app, it becomes a little bit more hidden. So here I'm adding a post and you can see I can go to advanced settings right before there. And then right underneath there, there's an accessibility section so you can write the alternative text. Regarding LinkedIn, this is another one that makes it very easy on desktop. So you can see I added a photo to the post and immediately there's an alt text button at the bottom. So now we can add alternative text very easily. And on mobile, this again is a very easy one. There's no hidden clicks here. You're adding the photo to your post and there's automatically an alt button at the bottom that you can interact with and add your alternative text. This is great. It adds a small little description here about what it is. It also says 1,000 characters, but please do not do 1,000 characters. Again, we want to stick with maybe 150 characters if possible, about 10 to 15 words. Next, we'll talk about Facebook. This one on desktop, for some reason, they hide it a little bit more again. So it's not quite as simple as Instagram and LinkedIn were, but here we added a photo to the post and now we can click on edit. And it gives us the alternative text button on the next section there. So it still makes it easy, but it is hidden behind an extra click. And on the mobile device, we just click that 3 little icon button at the top. We see that in a lot of platforms. It's kind of just like that extra advanced settings section. So you click on that and you get your edit all text button there. The good thing about TikTok is that there are no images. It's all video based. Videos don't have alternative text. So really, we don't have to worry about alternative text for TikTok. And finally, on Twitter, this is another one. I actually like how they do some of this. So yes, it's hidden behind an extra button here, behind the edit button when we create our tweet. However, they do, you can click your alt button and then it does everything you need to. However, on mobile and on desktop, but I only have the example on mobile here, we can click the alt text. It actually does, I think, the best description of what's going on with the alternative text. It talks about being concise, but present what's in your photo accurately enough to understand their context. And this was the only one that really talked about keeping it concise and involving context in there. So I thought that they did a good job with that as well. And finally, we want to make sure that we include image descriptions. For images conveying important information or important context, it is best to include a more detailed description of what is going on in the image at the bottom of your post. As mentioned, images, alternative text, those are only 10 to 15 words. Sometimes that's not enough to really convey all the information going on. So we do want to make sure that we are including that information somewhere. So here is a good example from the Royal National Institute of Blind People. I use this because we're actually going to be talking about fancy fonts in a little bit, but overall you can see we're pointing to an area where it says graphic. Don't use fancy fonts, written in a clear font in the center of the page and in a variety of complex fonts above and below. White text on a blue background. So this is a really great way to just kind of give a little bit more information that may be relevant to someone. So for this one instance, they want to really convey that there's a lot going on. So this would be a great instance of when that extra description is necessary. Next, we want to make sure we follow visual related WCAG criteria for videos. The most important one, I think, is really to avoid excessive blinking, flashing, or strobing videos. Avoid any issues for those who may have a seizure disorder or other cognitive disorder. We want to avoid video trends using the strobe or flashing overlays and effects. And next, we want to make sure that we caption all videos with high contrast text. And yes, we all already know that captions should have videos. Auto captions are there, which are okay, but really they're not enough. They're okay if I think for longer videos because it does take a little more effort to make those captions accurate. But if you're posting videos to your social media and you are an organization, then these should probably be correctly captioned. So no one has to get any of those weird automated mistakes because that does happen quite a lot. And they're not very long videos, so it shouldn't take all that long to make sure that your captions are accurate. But you can see I did mention high contrast text, and that's important because captions are not useful if a user cannot read them well. Make sure all captions include a solid or mostly solid background for readability. For example, here we have a TikTok and you can see the captions are right in the center here. Is white text with a black outline. And here it's not so horrible because the background overall is pretty basic. We have blue and white. There's a couple areas where it starts getting a little funky, but overall it's a pretty solid background. But can you imagine what that might look like if we were over the images of the people down below, or maybe on that building with all those vertical stripes? That could be a very frustrating experience to be able to read all of that. This one also included automated captions, or I think Jenna took a picture of this with them on, but it is helpful to at least have both of those. And there's even a way to be able to update some of those captions as well so that they can be a little bit more accurate. But by doing something like this, where we have that slightly transparent background on the text, it actually makes it easy to read no matter what the background is. So I'm saying to just do some kind of background to that text so that no matter what, a user can read what's happening there. And make sure we want to make sure that captions are not covered by platform content. This is really important and something I never really actually thought about until I had a baby. And then the only time I'm really on social media is when she's sleeping, which means I can't watch videos because I can't have the sound on. I'm not going to dare wake her. So I want those captions on. I'm also I'm that elder millennial style where I don't have TikTok. So I watch my TikToks on Instagram, or maybe I'm watching TikToks that went to Instagram that are now on Facebook. So it's one of those things we want to make sure that all of those platform contents are not in the way of the captions. Captions should be placed in an area that does not get covered by platform controls like the heart button, share button, or comment buttons, for example. And if you use the same video on all platforms, make sure it works on all platforms. So create a template and include those boundaries. It's very easy to make sure it doesn't get covered if you just plan ahead for it. So let's take a look at this one. So here's a TikTok here. We can see the platform controls are in the top. We have it along the right-hand side and along the bottom. So I'm going to put down these outlines here so you can kind of see like, okay, these are the boundaries that we do not want those captions within. But let's look at Instagram here. So very similar. We have the controls at the top, along the right, and on the bottom. But if I were to overlay those TikTok boundaries, you can actually see that we're having some content outside of those boundaries. So now if we had captions within that non-red area, they may be getting covered by the Sports Center and the follow. And if we look at Facebook here, you can see we have, again, the controls are at the top, along the bottom, and along the right-hand side. But if I put up those TikTok boundaries, we actually now have a lot more information in the way. So this is where I definitely see a lot more of the caption issues. So if the captions are down below, they're going to be covered by CBS Sports, follow, the caption, and any other things that may be popping up there. So we definitely want to just make sure you plan for worst case scenario, and those captions can always be seen and always be read. Next, we want to make sure we're following hashtag best practices. One of the most important things you can do is make sure that you're always using camel case for hashtags. And if you don't know what camel case means, it means that camel case requires making each word in the phrase capitalized. So as you can see here, the A in always, the U in use, C in camel, and the C in case. This creates a more readable sentence for those who are visual. Automatically, you can see word for word. But this also makes it more consumable by screen readers because their synthesized voices can recognize and pronounce individual words and won't concatenate and gargle them. Remember how we mentioned before that misspelled words, they're just going to try to pronounce it as they think it's supposed to be pronounced? This would be that same thing because technically it's one long misspelled word. So we want to make sure we make it easier for all screen readers. Now, I do have a video on the next slide, so I do apologize if it's loud for a second. I am ready for the volume in case I need to turn it down. It will be a screen reader, so it can be a little much if you're not used to it. So let's, actually, we're on this first one. We're not on the videos yet, so don't worry, but that is my warning for you when those videos do come up. So first we have a couple examples here of non-camel case. So as you can see, we have a few different ones. You may be able to figure it out, but it does take a minute to try to see what you're seeing. And maybe you're seeing some words that you shouldn't be seeing. I always end up seeing, I'm sorry if this is offensive at all, but I always see poopertunities every single time I look at this slide. And the first time I saw this in real life, I laughed way harder than I probably should. But by doing camel camel case, it makes it a lot easier to understand what you're actually reading. This is something now we can see photo of the day clearly, career ending Twitter typos. Oh my God, is that Tom Brady? And team topo opportunities. It was just a company that happened to not use camel case back in 2020, and I called them out on it immediately because it was pretty funny, but we just want to avoid any of those mishaps. So by using camel case, you're also ensuring that people can read it correctly. And next, we want to make sure that we include hashtag dumps in the comments, not the post itself. Including the hashtag dump in the post versus the comment does not actually change the reachability or the searchability. And when I'm talking about the hashtag dumps, I'm talking about putting like those 5 to 10, maybe 15 hashtags all in a row, kind of like you're just putting a bunch of SEO keywords in there, but now they're just hashtags. By including them in the first comment, you're making life a lot easier for many people. It doesn't feel as spammy, but especially for screen reader users. If they are all in the original comment or the original post itself, then the screen reader actually reads the entire post and will have to read every single hashtag before it moves on, which can be a very alarming experience. So by including in the post or the first comment itself, sorry, I keep getting those two confused. If you put it in the first comment, then the user has the ability to read them if they want to. Because even imagine if they're not in camel case as well, now they have to listen to 10 hashtags in a row. That can be a very frustrating experience. So for example, this is the older one that we have here, but you can see we added in the hashtags in a first comment of the post, but we also still include hashtags within the post itself, because obviously that's what we're supposed to be doing. We want to make sure people are understanding what the most important information is. However, we don't want to spam anyone with too many at a time. So by putting in the first comment, you're good to go there. And also, we want to make sure we're avoiding suggested hashtags. And before you come at me, I'm not telling you to just avoid them altogether. I'm telling you to avoid suggested hashtags if the suggested hashtag is not in camel case. As mentioned before, the way that it's written with camel case versus non-camel case does not change the searchability or the reachability. It does not change really how it's saved in the back end. It's always going to be saved in all lowercase letters in the platform's back end there. However, visually, it just obviously, again, makes a better situation. So if more people are using camel case, the more often it will come up in the suggested hashtags. But as you can see here in this example, I put hashtag marketing and I see marketing strategy and I see marketing digital and marketing tips. And those are not in camel case, but if you start using camel case more, then those will start appearing as the one that's popping up as the suggested one. So if you need to click on it, go for it and just change it back to camel case, you can. But overall, just remember, don't let it change it back to the non-camel case version. And finally, we want to make sure that we follow accessible social media best practices. We want to make sure that we use emojis sparingly and avoid emoticons. We want to keep our emoji usage accessible, so we make sure to use them in moderation and always put them at the end of your posts. This way, you do not affect the readability of your content, because emojis are actually not read as you probably expect them to be based on how they visually appear. And those who have low vision may not actually be able to distinguish between many of them in general, especially if they are used to convey important or actual content. So for example, instead of writing the word mountain and you use a mountain emoji, that can be a very frustrating experience for someone who may not be able to understand that cognitively or visually. And remember that using emojis to break up text or that are found in the middle of paragraphs can actually make your post sound completely unintelligible to a screen reader. So remember to put the most important information first. And now we're actually going to come to the video that I warned you about. As I mentioned before, this is a screen reader reading the sentence here with the usage of emojis. I do apologize if it's a lot at first, but I will make sure to focus on the volume so it's not too aggressive. So we're going to play that right now.
Frame I red heart emojis beaming face with smiling eyes grinning face with big eyes face with tears of joy grinning face with big eyes grinning face with big eyes grinning face with big eyes. But let's keep them down waving hand because they are very annoying weary face dizzy face person gesturing no for screen reader users smiling face with halo baby angel light skin tone baby angel medium dark skin tone baby angel dark skin tone baby angel medium skin tone. Relieved face folded hands here no evil monkey.
As you can see, there was a lot going on there, and especially if you're using the various skin tones and everything going on there, it's giving a lot more information than any user really wants to hear. It just broke everything up, and honestly, I have to come back and read it to even understand what we just heard. So we do want to make sure that we are avoiding emojis, and if you are using them, just put them at the end. Avoid that like word clap symbol, and like breaking it up over and over again, because you can imagine how frustrating that may be. And you may be asking, you mentioned emoticons. So what's the difference between an emoji and emoticon? And maybe I'm dating myself here. I'm not sure how often people actually use these anymore, but if you don't know, this is the usual shruggy emoticon. I'm sure a lot of you are also familiar with maybe the table flip as well. It's creating images with the various keystrokes. So you can see here, we got the shrugging emoticon and now the shrugging emoji. The difference between how these are read though, is that the emoticon is read as macron / katakanya / macron, whereas the emoji is read as shrugging woman. And that's because the emojis are basically just images with alternative text. So as you can see here, it's probably best to avoid the emoticons altogether and keep your emoji usage extremely simple. And our next might be a little difficult to read, so let me fix that for you. So we want to avoid using decorative fonts. Decorative fonts that are the fonts that are not the platform or systems fonts. They are just mathematical symbols that look like cool fonts. Sometimes they just look italic, sometimes they just look bold, but they become completely illegible to screen reader users. And not only that, these are not English letters, and so therefore they cannot be translated to another language. And honestly, I have a design background and I obviously love some great design and creativity, but a lot of these decorative fonts are very difficult or just plain old impossible to read. I do have another example of how these decorative fonts are actually read by a screen reader. So you'll see here, I'm not going to make you listen to the whole thing. I will stop it halfway through because it is a lot, but I do think it's important for everyone to see what someone might be dealing with here.
Edit text. U. Mathematical sans serif italic small t. Mathematical sans serif italic small h. Mathematical sans serif italic small 1. Mathematical sans serif italic small n. Mathematical sans serif italic small k. It's mathematical script small c. Mathematical script small u. Mathematical script small t. E2. Mathematical sans serif bold small d. Mathematical sans serif bold small r. Mathematical sans serif bold small 1. Mathematical sans serif bold small t. Mathematical sans serif bold small a. Your tweets and usernames. Mathematical bold tract or small t.
As you can see, that was a lot. I tried to stop it even sooner, and so for some reason my keyboard got a little stuck. So I do apologize that you had to listen to that probably a little longer than you wanted to, but you can see it's a very frustrating experience. So yes, it might look cool. It might look like you're emphasizing some text, but overall it's completely just horrible to listen to for some users. Next, we want to make sure that we're using shortened URLs from sites like Bitly. I know if you're using scheduling apps, I know like HubSpot automatically changes any URLs to a shortened one to save on character count. Another great reason is just, for instance, Bitly, you can end up doing a more human readable link as well. So for instance, you could say like bit.ly/accessibility slides or something if I was to send these in a shortened link. Otherwise, you'd have to go to like atten.io/webinars/resources/this/that. And at that point, you're not going to remember what it is. So obviously it's great for a human readable point, but also for character count. And finally, we want to make sure that we post in various forms to all of your social media accounts. Link back to your accessible website with more information regarding this post. Provide multiple points of entry for the same information. It gives all users the ability to interact with your organization based on their preferred or more accessible platform for them. And keep in mind, I'm saying to obviously repeat content on multiple platforms. I'm not saying to do the exact same information on each one. You can obviously have various forms of artwork. Maybe depending on the text count, you want to make sure or the character count, your text changes slightly. You're creating various forms of the same content to display the information. Just be sure you post that one event that you're putting out on Instagram onto the other platforms in various ways so that all users can get that information however they feel best. And overall, thank you so much for joining today. And remember that digital accessibility isn't something you need to completely fix overnight. Making small changes, even if it's just on your social accounts, will make a huge difference over time. And keep working at it, and let's make all of our social platforms more accessible to everyone.